are back once again. Another week, another episode of the Into Greatness podcast with Jason and Jolene. I am Jason.
And I am Jolene.
And we are going to dive in to childhood healing the wounds of childhood. Yeah.
I'm going to say let's cannonball.
We want to cannonball that. Okay.
Kids cannonball more than they dive.
True. Actually, if you look at it, most places you go, they tell you not to dive.
Yes. Oh, don't go head first.
Don't go head first because you're going to get hurt.
Yeah, and we don't want to go head first into our childhood because that is not where the memories are stored. They are not in our thought process. They are in our body and they are in our emotions.
That's right. Ooh, deep.
Fuck, we are just so good, guys. Like we're revving it up here.
On a roll once
season.
Again, yes.
All right, so what inspired this episode, Jason?
Well, and I texted you about this one. The other day...
He's like, it was a while ago.
It was a while ago. Griffin and I were hanging out in his room, and he is 12. He has his stuffies that he loves, kind of thing like that. And he was playing with them, and he doesn't do that much because he's moving out of that phase. And within a year, the stuffies are going to be not gone, but put somewhere
under the stairs with the rest of the stuffies.
The rest of the stuffies. We'll have a stuffy storage area. But he's actually playing with them and doing voices and talking, and I was kind of just in the room for some reason. He's like, "Did you ever do this, Dad?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I did. I'd play with my stuffies." And he goes, and I'd be like, when I had my G.I. Joe and my Star Wars figures and had a lot of fun with them, and I'd create these whole elaborate stories for hours. And then it was like one of these moments where I was like, "Oh, Griffin would have had so much fun with G.I. Joe. I used to have a whole bunch of G.I. Joe." And then my mom made me sell them when I was done playing with them. So there's no put them in a box. It's like, you should just sell them. She was very materialistic. If you sell them, you got all this money. And in my head, I'm like, oh, money. 13, making a whole bunch of bucks. This would be great. But I remember as soon as I sold all those G.I. Joes, I was like, fuck, they're gone. That's it. That's that whole part of my life is history. And I didn't get to share them with my kid. You don't think at 14 that you're going to have a child of your own that might want to play with it. You know what I mean? You're just focused on, have some cash out of this.
Yeah.
And that meant bringing that back really pissed me off.
Yeah.
Really pissed me off.
So my response to that, because Jason inquired, how do I dive into some of that, right? Working with Alicia and whatever that be, and kind of in the moment. And it's funny because as you're telling it right now to me, I'm like, oh, as a parent, I've been there. I've done that, right? Okay, let's move on. Let's sell these. Let's sell that. You're wanting this? Okay, well, let's move that out. And we do this at Christmas and whatever. I don't know if my kids have anything substantially that they've attached to like that.
Yeah.
For that, for you, that was a big substantial era of something. I feel like my kids' Lego might be like that at one point or something. I'll hang on to it maybe.
Yep.
But yeah, so it's like a storage issue as a parent and you're like, oh God. But for you, what's highlighted in that moment, and I think I said this, you will want to work on the wound of, I don't like being told what to do before I'm ready to do it.
Yeah. Which is true, right? And that
don't want to be forced prematurely to do something I'm not ready to do.
Yeah. And even then, when I decide what to do with it, it's my decision. Do I box it, or if I want to get rid of it, do I get rid of it and sell it?
Yes.
Right? And that's been something through my whole life that I've dealt with. And it was something I didn't even think of till just now, Jolene. Playing with those toys taught me how to tell stories.
Oh.
Because it wasn't just some people just play and they just bang, 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 shoot, shoot. I created whole elaborate stories that went on for play sessions after play sessions after play sessions after play sessions, the characters, all this stuff. It was more than just a toy. It was like a creative outlet.
That was your medium for your art,
yeah.
Essentially. That was the medium for your art. And it's interesting because I think that is something I've always wanted my kids to have make-believe play, and they really don't. That hasn't been a big thing for them.
It hasn't for Griffin either.
And I wonder if this is a generational thing because they have more forms of entertainment available. I think it is now.
Yeah, I think it's become that. They do it through video games or YouTube video, all this other stuff that we didn't have.
Yeah, and it's really too bad because I think the organic... and that's what I love about my children's daycare is they were all outdoor nature based and they would do a lot of that kind of stuff. It's funny what I would hear that they were playing and making up. And I have one who's a lot more imaginative and things like that. So for you, those toys then came back like this flash from the past. They represented so much to you. And then you had, I would label it secondary grief. Secondary grief is when we grieve what could have been that isn't. So it's like we have primary grief where it's the loss of the person, the place, or the thing. And then secondary grief is like the things they're not present for anymore, right? in that moment, it was the secondary grief of, I can't offer this same thing to my child.
No, exactly.
Wow.
You know, without like trying to go out and track down a whole bunch of the new ones and spend like thousands of dollars, which I mean, I'd be willing to do if he was like even a few years younger, but it's going to be over.
Yeah.
Right. And will he appreciate it as much? Probably not. That's more of a me thing.
It is.
Right?
Yeah. And this is where it's funny, because when we talk about minimalist living, this is where we have that conflict with that. Like, what are the things we hold on to? What are the things that hold memories for us, but maybe not other people? Right. And that's why I always tell people, like, you might have a collection of things that mean wonderful things to you, but they might not prompt anything for your kids to want of yours when you die, because you never actually did anything with them. Right?
Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah,
totally.
like I remember with my ex, he had all of his grandpa's hats and they were just in a box and he wanted to keep them in case our kids ever wanted them. And I was like, but the kids will never associate that with you because they don't even know they exist. Like, your memories are attached to that. So if you want to display them so the kids know it's your grandpa's and it means that to you, you can create that connection of reference. But other than that, they don't have meaning in the same way that they could, right?
Exactly.
So I told Kevin, you got to start wearing the shoes. Your kids will remember you wearing the shoes.
Then there's a point to it, right?
Yeah.
My dad's tools, I always remembered. Mom sold all those too. Fuck. Anyways. But
I still have my dad's tools.
Right?
We
But I would
got
have kept
divvied
them.
up.
I would have kept
yes,
them, right?
his
But she
hands
sold
touched them.
Those were his tools
he created,
that he used
yes.
instead of selling them off for money.
Yeah.
Right?
So thinking about this and what that larger wound is, right?
Yep.
So things out of my control, decisions being made for me, like your jaw's even tight.
Oh, I know. I can feel it. It's like my teeth are starting to ache.
Yeah, but so when
Right?
I'm doing work with people, this is what happens. And then I say, like, pay attention to your jaw. That usually represents where you kept your mouth shut, where you weren't able to speak up. And as a kid, you wouldn't have been able to speak up.
Well,
right?
you had especially from I think as parents now, we're more open to dialogue with our kids about things. But when we were growing up, there was like, nope, we made a decision. We made the decision. This is what's going to happen.
Yeah. And that was just a larger form of peer pressure, because then this rolls out into how do things like this happen with our peers. And it can happen at the simplest level of, hey, you're all at the candy store. Which candy are you going to pick? Well, often one of my kids will pick something they didn't innately want, but it was what the other kids might have picked and it looked like a good idea. Right?
Yeah,
and then
totally.
they were like, oh, I didn't want that. Right? Like, I remember that even happened on pizza day for Marsh. We were ordering hot lunch and he's like, oh, and I was like, you really like the veggie, don't you? He's like, well, I don't want that again because, and it was his like favorite kind. And he's like, everybody at school made fun of me because I didn't have pepperoni like them. I'm like, that is so lame.
It's kids
I
being
hate
lame.
that.
I know,
like,
right?
Like, it's so ridiculous, but it completely influenced him to pick pepperoni next time. I mean, he likes pepperoni, but the veggie pizza's pretty good.
Yeah.
Right? Olives, tomatoes, peppers. It's good.
Other people can be dicks.
Oh, man. Huge dicks. But that's a form of the peer pressure,
It is,
right?
totally. And it's usually very subtle.
Yeah. I reference that in my workshop when we start talking about intuition. And those of you who have done it and have listened to it, you'll know this is my ice cream reference. And I'm not going to tell you guys because that's like exclusive to my workshop. So. But we talk about this ice cream reference all the time, and it really hits home for a lot of people. And then they start using that as their little temperature gauge through their life. Oh my gosh, I'm ordering too much of this and not enough of that. And this is why I'm holding resentment and this and that. So for you were like, whoa, that brought up so much anger for you, right? And I also love the way the universe works, because part of me is like, did Griffin need to be playing with the stuffies in that moment? Or did you need that moment more than anything?
That's
and our
interesting.
kids are often the best teachers. My kids will often present me with a lot of the things that I'm needing to work on or that are happening, because they're so much more open to receiving, right? Like receiving ideas and inspiration and whatever kind of guidance our guide, Shaniqua I got your ass, is giving us. So he could have just been like a messenger for you. And that might not have been about him playing with stuffies in that moment. It was about you really exploring this part.
Yeah, it could be. Those things we don't really know.
And when you look at that at a business perspective, you had to say goodbye to some things last year in your business that you were kind of forced to do because of the way things were rolling out, right?
Yeah.
Just in your decision around things and stuff. When we're forced to do that because maybe someone else isn't playing the way we want to play or whatever, all
or being
that
shady.
all of that is going to feel like the same wound. It's all in the same file for you, Jason. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. So all those things are just getting poked and connected with. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So what does that bring up for you? You guys, Jason's whole demeanor has changed. He's so pissed right now, and I'm glad you're standing. Like shift back and forth because you'll process as you're talking about it. Because your body is holding this. You're rigid. You're way less open, and you're thinking. You're like, fuck.
That's exactly. It's like, where's that Santa Claus?
Yes. Yeah, because I actually think this is showing up in way more areas than you're aware of.
Oh, I'm sure it is. It's a whole dynamic that I ended up having with the woman who raised me, basically, right? It's funny because you look at that because she was raised by like a cast iron bitch. Like Grandma Newell was a cast iron fucking bitch. And I think we've talked about this because my adoptive mom's dad died when she was 3. They lived on a farm in Saskatchewan. So Grandma Newell, who wasn't Grandma Newell then, it was Grandma Chamberlain, had to basically raise mom by herself at a time when that never happened.
Wow.
During the Depression.
Yeah.
Right? And so you had to be tough as nails, a cast iron bitch, right? In that time
back then, yeah.
You didn't fuck with her. Didn't fuck with Grandma Newell at all.
Yeah.
But the impact of that. So then my adoptive mom's childhood wounds that weren't healed were then passed on to me.
Yeah.
And I even said this to Jess. Like I said, this is something because she's had her things too. I'm refusing to let this wound get passed on any further.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's got to stop.
Yeah.
But I've noticed, especially like this year, I think since things have slowed down a bit for me professionally, I've had the time also to pick through this stuff because I've been seeing it a lot more, right? So it's interesting, but I think there's a tendency in our society, well, that's happened, there's nothing you can do about it, so just walk away from it, and I think that's bullshit.
Yeah.
Right? I think you need to face these things and work through them, and that's a process that I've kind of got to figure out as I kind of go through this. Part of that is allowing myself to enjoy these, which I think you suggested, enjoy these moments with Griffin when he wants to, because those days are coming to an end for him naturally.
Yeah.
And just like the things that I like, it's not like we've talked about my friend Carl, who's like living in that period. You can't do that, but you can still enjoy those things from when you were a kid. Like, watch that movie you liked from the 80s. As long as you're not living in that era, right?
Yeah.
But if you really want to watch The Dead Zone, which I did last night with Christopher Walken from 1983, I did that, right?
And that's the thing to recognize is that like you get to reparent the child within you when you're presented with these opportunities. So you get to reparent the version of you that was forced to sell things when you decide that Griffin has control over how he lets his belongings come and go.
Yep.
Boom. You've given yourself what you weren't offered, right? And remember, like kind of like Jason just mentioned in terms of like living in the past, remember that you will get boomeranged back to previous versions of yourself depending on what is brought up. Music can bring that up. Like genres of music can bring that up. Styles of clothing, locations, right? So you can visit places. Oh gosh, we went here all the time as kids, right?
Which we did on our Kelowna trip. We stayed in the same Sandman that I stayed in when I was a kid. And that pool that Griffin and I swam in was the same one I swam in with my dad and grandpa.
So much inner child healing. And that was the same time you had given me that text message.
Yeah, it was like
too.
literally
It
like
was a couple days after. Yeah, so recognize you're given lots of these opportunities to go back and really nourish and bring up some of that because you're then going to connect with that version of yourself, whether it's the 8-year-old or the 16-year-old or whatever that looks like. So when we get to boomerang and have these blasts from the past, we get kind of like teleported back there, right? And often it is that version of us from like a nervous system perspective that's responding in that time. So cognitively, we are at the age we're at, but often the rest of us is responding differently, right? Yeah. And just to know that, because sometimes our responses won't make sense or we won't realize why we're more emotional about something or more triggered about something or less rational about something. And it's because that rational version of us right now is not what's acting all of that out. And that can come in really delightful ways, or it can come in not delightful ways where we're responding in very immature, emotional manners rather than, a more integrated, mature manner.
Like the woman in that one video in the middle of Walmart that's freaking out and thrashing on the floor like a child. Have you seen that video?
No.
Oh, yeah. Something that didn't go right for her in Walmart. And she's on the floor just like having like a 2-year-old temper tantrum.
Yeah.
She was working through some shit right there.
Wow.
In not a very healthy
and
way.
this is so there's like, and this is why like certain foods can bring back, or certain candies can bring back memories for people, right? Like we've talked about different things. I remember referencing Thrills gum that remind me of like my grandma, or different things like that. You know, I feel it every time I drive through Westwold. My grandparents on my dad's side, they used to live there, and I feel this sense of like, yeah, just this familiarity there, and like boom, all of a sudden all the memories flash by as you drive past. And it's how many years, right? So recognizing some of those pieces, and then when you look at, okay, well, what did that version of me need back then? So you'll hear a lot of things like inner child healing, and that's essentially what we're talking about, right? Like, what did that version of me need, and how is this version of me still impacted by those things? So for you, it's, I'm impacted when I am forced to do things I don't want to do before I'm ready, or don't have control over the outcome of what I believe should be my decision, kind of thing. Yeah.
That's always been a big one.
Yeah.
Because I'm in life, even like to be adopted, an adoptee, you had no control over that. So it's something since day one. That's that primal wound. There's a whole book about the primal wound that I've read. That creates right there, even when you're not even aware of it, a wound to heal. But a lot of people aren't even aware of that wound's even there.
No.
People just chalk it off. That's part of who you are as a character or your person.
Yeah.
But it's not.
No.
You can fix that.
Yep, absolutely. Race can do that to us, right? Any of these different socioeconomic status can do that to us as well, right?
Oh, there's so many things that impact us.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you were to go back and highlight the things, and often we will notice this when we're parents and maybe caregivers of children, we will start to notice similar things in the story in front of us, right? So what is it that's happening for that child that's highlighting maybe what we needed or what our story was? It's very, very common, right? That's where a lot of people will get triggered, and this stuff will come out that they didn't really realize was sitting there because it really wasn't shown to them at all.
No.
You didn't have an experience like the G.I. Joe experience here, right? How would you know it was sitting there that way? So you don't have to become a parent to be able to have some of those moments, right? You can be witnessing children, right? So this was an experience most recently. Somebody they were providing childcare for these individuals, and what was happening to the children in the family just went boom. Oh my God, I remember what it was like to be a child and be treated like that by my mom. And it then becomes this whole piece of like, how can I show up for that child the way they need, the way I might have needed somebody to? And you get to change the present day for someone else at the same time that you reconcile what wasn't for you. And I have quite a few people in my practice right now with older parents. They're, of course, in their like 50s and stuff, and their parents are now aging and dying, and they are going through a lot of that themselves in terms of brave conversations of harsh parenting styles that really shut them down for years and that they've been coming for healing for, and finally are sharing with that parent, like, this is what your behavior did to me.
Yeah.
And they're still feeling like timid children in these moments. And sometimes it's the fragile nature of the old parent that even just gives them the bravery to be able to give that message.
Because that fragile parent is no longer able to do the things that they could have done when you were like, 2-3 feet tall and they were towering at 6 feet or whatever.
They're not able to harm them. And often the feedback from that parent has been, oh my gosh, I had no idea. This is how I perceived you doing your own thing, or this is how I perceived your independence, so we left you alone, or didn't even consider that. Like when we think about parenting and how conscious we have to be of everything right now, that generation was not equipped with that. No. They were busy working, and that was it. They showed up, like the males showed up that way, the females showed up another way. They were not nourishing each other in loving relationships, right?
No, they weren't.
Really?
Yeah.
So then you have two people living fairly unsatisfied lives, serving, again, it's all about a give and take with children. It's mostly a give, right? You have all those things topped with people having less awareness of how to live a more satisfying life, a more nourishing, self-nourished life.
Yeah.
Right? Because the males will say, all I did was work for my family. I just worked to provide. That's
and in that mind,
and
that's
nobody,
what they were doing.
It was a thankless job, right?
Yep.
And then the woman feels like she's just working to provide and nurture everybody else and isn't getting nurtured. Right?
Oh, yeah,
And then
it's
the
true.
kids feel like they have these emotionally unavailable parents that are not paying attention to their needs or letting them be children, or they were bombarded with chores back then because life was not as easy as it is now. So they had to just work. It was a harder life, right? So everyone has their version of the story, right?
Big
and
time.
everyone felt like they did their best, honestly.
And in their minds, and you can't, like, people kind of like, so you should get mad at that. I don't think getting mad solves it, because they were just doing the best they could with what they were equipped with.
Yeah, that's
and
exactly.
what the times called for.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't look at the past through a modern lens. Like, you can't, except other to pick out where you can make things better.
Yeah. And the thing that I'm always reminding people of in my office and myself as a mother, right? Like, I'm a single mom of 3 kids and there is not enough of me around. And I will tell people, especially when we feel this parent guilt around, oh, I don't want to this, I don't want to that. I'm like, listen, everybody grows up with wounds. That's why we are here, to experience life. It's like getting plaque on your teeth. If you're eating and being a human being, you're going to get plaque on your teeth and you're going to need to scrape it off from time to time. That's what a dentist is for.
Yep.
Therapy should just be standard. It should be like dentist appointments, because we are acquiring plaque, which is negative experiences embedded in our nervous system, in our brain. We just scrape that off. We tidy that shit up. That's how I look at it, right? It's expected. If we are living this life, it's expected that we are going to acquire wounds. So I tell people, like, I am well aware every single one of my kids is going to have their own wound. I know exactly probably what it's going to be based on all 3 of them and the way that our life is designed, because I can be doing the best job. And I remember I said this to Kevin. I was like, I am doing such a shitty job. And he's like, but you're doing your best. I said, I didn't say I wasn't doing my best.
It's
right
now. I feel
just,
I'm doing a shitty job.
I am doing a shitty job because I cannot meet each of their needs. Right? Like, I cannot give each child 100% of what they need. I'm giving them a half-ass version because that's all that's physically possible right now. It's not like, yeah, it's my best, but still my best is never going to meet their needs. And that is not a shaming piece. That's reality, right? And that my kids will always feel like, oh, my mom wasn't able to give this sibling stole that and that. And that is the reality of it. And it's about then reconciling, okay, it wasn't because I wasn't lovable. It was because my parent wasn't capable of it. And I tell people that all the time. It's not, because we will acquire a wound that says, I'm not good enough. I'm not deserving of my parents' love. And it's like, no, your parent wasn't capable of giving you the love you needed. And that doesn't mean it's because they didn't want to. It means they weren't capable of it. And sometimes it was because they were emotionally blocked, or they were abusive, or whatever that be. Or it was because there was not enough of them, or there was too much demand somewhere else, right? Like, it's not always negatively intended, but it's fact.
Yeah, it
just is.
It just, exactly. I was just going to say, it is the way it is.
And the best breakthroughs in therapy when we're doing inner child work and childhood healing is when that person can now see their parent from the perspective of an adult and go, yeah, you know what? In that situation, they did the best they could, and their best was kind of crappy. And I tell my kids that all the time. Like, we're all going to do things differently, and I may do some things better than your other parent might, but they're doing their best, and sometimes their best kind of sucks. Yeah. Sometimes my best kind of sucks, right? But we are trying our best, and it's not because you're not deserving or good enough of more. It's just this is what we got.
Yeah,
right?
This is all we got to work with now.
Yeah. And it's the same thing when they're fighting over a cucumber. Sorry, you each get 2 slices. That's all I got right now.
Yeah, there's no more cucumbers.
And this is also the reality of life, right? So I do think sometimes we hold these really high ideals of what we should have had. And I really hate this like parent shaming in the healing game, because there is no way around it. Like, you go back to the depression. You go back to these times. You go back, like, what more could they have offered?
Yeah, that was actually, when you looked at the situation, not too bad, all things considered.
Yeah, definitely more emotional warmth, definitely more of this, more of that. But what would that have required of them? It would have required a softening, which probably would have meant that there was no food, or late hours working at such and such. Like, something's always got to give. So we just try to keep doing better. That's really what it is. We just keep trying to do better.
Yep, exactly. And understand that that's what needs to happen.
Yeah. And also, I would say back then too, like, let the kids cry. Don't tell them, like,
stop crying,
like, and a lot of those things, like, of course there's a lot more, but here's the thing. They didn't know what we know now.
No.
They didn't know that. So how do we expect them to be able to have tools for something they like, do the job that they didn't have the tools for?
You can't.
Right?
You
So
can't.
that's why I always tell people, you know, when it comes to healing, so we can have older generations share their resiliency with us and their wounds with us. But when it comes to healing, that's a backwards job. People are like, I don't want to heal my parent. I don't want to this. And I said, well, you've got the full toolbox right now that they didn't have access to. So you can choose to keep it or you can choose to share it.
Yeah, your choice.
But it is a backwards job, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think so too. And if you have the chance to kind of heal that, I think you should take it. That's one thing Mom and I didn't get. The chance for me to actually go and like rip into her in a loving way.
Yeah.
Right?
So can I ask you, and you can share or not, if you could take this version of you, knowing the importance of giving that childhood voice something at the end of her life, what might you have wanted to say?
It's funny. It's changed. There was one point where I'd just be like, I fucking hate you.
Yep.
It would come out just like that. And I'm glad you're dying.
Yeah.
Right. Now it's like, it would be like, I understand why you were the way you were.
Wow.
But go fuck yourself.
Okay. Yeah. And when we have those moments, a lot of times we don't get to say that to people's faces. So we have that moment right now. Like, feel that.
Yeah, it feels good,
Jason
actually.
feels that right now.
Yeah.
His whole demeanor's changed. His whole demeanor's changed, right? But that's a big piece of it is like, where do we allow ourselves, even if there's no receiving ears, where do we allow ourselves the safety and the permission to say that?
Yeah.
And it's even more profound when we actually get to say it and have it received, and never say it with the expectation of getting an apology.
No, that's like you're setting yourself up almost for failure to think, they're going to be like, oh yes, and they're so going to everything's going to be great.
You're doing it to honor your younger self. You're doing it to show up as the adult, supporting your younger self to say, this little boy has something to say, and I'm here to protect him while he says it.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter what your response is. It's about you gave that boy a chance to speak.
Yeah.
And those are really beautiful pieces. And if you are in a circumstance in your life where there is unfinished business like that, I encourage you, because you will leap a generation of healing when you do that.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you can do it like next lifetime, or you can do it now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's your solemn commitment to yourself. And it's not with the intention to hurt the other person. It's the intention of, I need to choose me. And by choosing me in this moment, it's about voicing what my experience was here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And I say take it, because if you have to wait till later, it just gets harder.
Yeah.
And the lesson takes longer.
Yeah.
It's better just to take it while you can.
Yep. Absolutely. So that is a little toe dip into childhood healing and ways that our childhood comes up and hangs out with us in the present, and how we can leap back to change things from the past in kind of like a Marty and Doc sort of way.
Or Rick and Morty.
Okay. Yeah.
Sort of way, which is just, anyways.
Yeah, I like that. I like Back to the Future because that's one I've actually seen.
It's good too. And actually Rick and Morty's based off of Marty and
Oh,
It
okay.
is. Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to check this out. All right. So let us know. Actually, feel free to send us some private messages around some things that came up for you in this episode, because I guarantee you have been daydreaming a little bit as we've been talking about.
Oh yeah,
this right?
This is a topic I think that needs to be talked about a lot more publicly, because like in therapy you talk about healing child wounds, but you don't hear it a lot in the general pop culture conversation around mental health.
Yeah, you'll hear people talking about their glory days. They go back, they get lost in stories of childhood. Yeah. That's where it highlights. You can easily hop back there, but spend a little bit of time back there.
Yeah.
Go back, see what that feels like, see where parts of you are very fond, especially things that bring you joy.
Yeah.
Because I think that the joy we had in childhood, and when we go back and talk about some of the things in childhood, we just don't have that in adult years the same way. So that's a good way of stealing joy from previous experiences. Yeah. That's a way you can handpick it into your present. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I like that.
All right. Well, that wraps up this favorite episode of the Into Greatness podcast. We're back next week with your next favorite episode. Until then, I'm Jason.
And I'm Jolene.
Go play with your toys.
Okay.